Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the fascinating and sometimes hidden inner workings of corporate sustainability reporting. Today, we're zeroing in on the fuel cells and industrial batteries industry. Specifically, we're going to navigate the SASB guidelines that govern exactly how these companies report their supply chain resilience and activity metrics. So, if you've ever wondered how the companies powering the entire clean energy transition manage their absolute most precious resources, well, you're in the right place.
But right off the bat, we hit a massive roadblock. Think about this for a second. How exactly do you report your deepest, most critical supply chain risks to the public and to your investors without accidentally handing over your closely guarded corporate secrets? It's a total high-wire act. Companies absolutely have to be transparent to secure funding. But if they show all their cards, their competitors are going to swoop right in and eat their lunch.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unpack this logical roadmap step by step today. First, the transparency dilemma. Then, defining critical materials, disclosing without leaking secrets, the power of normalization, activity metrics in action, and finally, resilient supply chains. Let's get to it.
Starting right off with Section 1, the transparency dilemma, balancing competing interests.
To really wrap our heads around the SASB standard, we have to look at the immense pressure these companies are under right now as the clean energy transition shifts into overdrive. So on one hand, you've got investor needs. Investors are pouring millions, sometimes literally billions of dollars into fuel cell and battery manufacturers, and they're demanding complete visibility into supply chain risks. Because let's face it, if a company can't source the materials it needs, that huge investment practically goes to zero. But then on the flip side, you have corporate needs. These manufacturers operate in a cutthroat environment. They spend years developing proprietary blends and securing really niche supply chains. Protecting that competitive advantage, that confidentiality, is absolutely their lifeblood.
Moving on to Section 2, defining critical materials, the fuel of the future.
So what is it that's actually causing all this tension? Well, the SASB standard gives us a really precise definition here. A critical material is a material that is both essential in use and subject to the risk of supply restriction. It's that dual nature that makes them so incredibly tricky. It's not just that a company needs them to survive, it's that they need them and there's a very real chance they might not be able to get them. We're talking geopolitical tensions, limited global resources, or maybe just poor governance in the regions they're sourced from.
To ground this in reality, let's look at some specific examples the SASB framework calls out for the fuel cell and battery industry. We're talking about elements like antimony and cobalt. We've also got the platinum group metals, so platinum, palladium, iridium, and of course the ever-important rare earth elements, things like yttrium and scandium. I mean, honestly, these sound like things you'd mine on an alien planet in a sci-fi movie, right? But the reality is, without these highly specific and often incredibly hard-to-source elements, modern industrial batteries and fuel cells just simply cannot function.
Now, heavily relying on these materials introduces some very specific threats. The standard highlights that companies face actual physical limits on availability and access. Plus, they're heavily exposed to wild, volatile changes in price. And on top of all that, you have regulatory and reputational risks if these materials happen to be sourced irresponsibly. This is exactly why investors care so much. A sudden price spike in cobalt or a supply chain disruption in platinum that can literally wipe out a manufacturer's profit margins overnight.
All right, Section 3, disclosing without leaking secrets, the SASB solution.
So here's the million-dollar question. How do companies disclose these massive risks without leaking their trade secrets? Well, think of it like a master chef's recipe. You can absolutely prove to the health inspector that your kitchen is safe, that you're storing things at the right temp, and that your ingredient supply chain is totally robust, all without ever handing over the exact measurements of your award-winning secret sauce. The SASB standard applies this exact same logic to corporate sustainability reporting.
So the crucial point is actually written right into the standard itself. SASB metric R-FC-440A.1 explicitly states, and I quote, "Disclosure itself would not compromise the entity's ability to maintain confidential information." The standard is intentionally designed to allow companies to be super transparent about their risk management processes without forcing them to just hand their competitors a massive advantage on a silver platter. Instead of demanding exact quantities of every single proprietary element, SASB requires companies to describe the strategies they're actually using to mitigate those risks. Are they diversifying their suppliers? Are they stockpiling materials to buffer against those crazy price swings we talked about? Are they actively procuring alternative or substitute materials to get away from relying on rare earth elements? Or, maybe they're making heavy investments in recycling technology to reclaim materials when a product reaches the end of its life. This right here, This is the goldmine of data that investors actually want. They just want to know that the company has a solid plan.
And here is the ultimate reporting loophole, explicitly permitted by the SASB framework. If identifying a specific material would cause competitive harm, like, say, revealing a highly proprietary new compound your R&D team just cooked up, companies must still disclose the risks and their strategies, but they are not required to disclose the specific material itself. This perfectly protects trade secrets while still delivering that operational visibility that investors desperately need.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of normalization, leveling the playing field.
Okay, so now that we know how companies safely disclose their qualitative risk data, how do investors actually use this data to compare, say, a massive global conglomerate to a tiny innovative startup? Well, they use what we call activity metrics. By SASB's definition, activity metrics quantify the scale of specific operations. Their entire purpose is to be used in conjunction with other metrics, like those critical material risks we just talked about, to normalize the data and facilitate comparison. Really, it's the only way to get a true apples-to-apples comparison across what is a wildly diverse industry.
Let's move into Section 5, Activity Metrics in Action, Measuring Scale.
Let's see how this builds. For the fuel cells and industrial batteries industry, the SASB standard actually dictates 3 core activity metrics. Step 1 is simply the number of units sold. Pretty straightforward. But unit counts alone don't tell the whole story, right? Because battery sizes vary so drastically. So Step 2 measures the total battery storage capacity sold. And then Step 3 measures the total fuel cell energy production capacity sold.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific unit of measure required here. For both total battery storage capacity and total fuel cell energy production capacity, the scale is strictly measured in megawatt hours, or MWH. This standardization is absolutely vital. It means an investor isn't left scratching their head guessing how a large battery from company A compares to a heavy-duty battery from company B. Everything is just boiled right down to the raw megawatt hours of energy they're actually putting out into the market.
And this is where the magic really happens in ESG reporting. On the left side, we have our qualitative sustainability risks, those critical materials like antimony, cobalt, and the platinum group metals, along with the strategies to manage them. And on the right side, we have our hard quantitative activity metrics measured in megawatt hours sold. By scaling those sustainability risks right alongside this massive production scale, investors can perfectly compare the ESG data. They can accurately determine which company is actually the most efficient, the most secure, and the most resilient per megawatt hour of energy they produce. It just totally levels the playing field.
Wrapping things up with Section 6, Resilient Supply Chains, looking at the big picture.
So connecting all these accounting mechanics back to the real-world clean energy transition happening all around us, what you should really take away from this is that SASB has created a perfectly balanced ecosystem of corporate transparency. By standardizing these disclosures, companies are empowered to protect their hard-earned trade secrets while investors still get clear, normalized visibility into supply chain resilience. It's a total win-win. And frankly, it actually encourages companies to be more forthcoming rather than just hiding behind a wall of silence.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to ponder today. As this clean energy transition accelerates at breakneck speed and the competition for these critical materials reaches a fever pitch, will resource scarcity eventually force us to completely redefine how we measure corporate transparency? Are these current loopholes going to be enough, or will the market demand even more visibility in the future? Well, that's all for today's Explainer. I highly encourage you to keep exploring the incredible world of ESG reporting and resource constraints. See you next time.